You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat.
And so then I think too, we often run into a problem of what I call catharsis versus catechism. And it's it might be a bit of a false dichotomy, but it's kind of that idea. Do we let the cathartic emotionality of these movies and stories define our worldview and our relationship goals? Or do we actually rest on the foundation of Scripture to define what we should be looking for in a partner, what we should be expecting from love, and how we can then go about building what can be the most beautiful relationship that two people can have. The marriage is supposed to reflect to the world the symbiotic unity of the Trinity, right? Mm-hmm. God the Father, Christ, he brings his bride to his son. They are united. They become one flesh, and they're supposed to, in that exercising of their roles, in how they mature and grow together, we're supposed to be reflecting that beautiful picture of the Trinity to the rest of the world. That relationship can be a magnificent witness, but if we allow just trite emotionality to be our foundation or define what we expect from a relationship, then that witness gets hampered. Our happiness and holiness gets hampered. And honestly, I think too, like, catharsis without proper catechism subconsciously catechizes you. If you grow up watching these movies and that is your basis and understanding for what a relationship is supposed to be, what you should expect from your partner, what you should or shouldn't have to sacrifice for your partner, you are being catechized, which is a lot of what popcorn theology is kind of all about, right? Mm-hmm. That idea of watching the movies mindfully, sifting through the messages that they're telling us. So I see a lot of that subconscious understanding. I actually looked for some quotes today. I was trying to find, like, what are some quotes about love that you see in movies? And what I discovered was they don't come out right and say it.
Nope.
They don't come out right and go, you just
you can never
toxic,
say I
sweetheart.
Love you.
Well, they won't say that, but they're like, they won't come right out and be like, you just stay toxic and you keep true to yourself and do whatever you want to do. And if no one will bow to you, you keep going. You know, they won't say that out loud. And yet the way the relationships, they're absolutely pushing it. And so you have to be so mindful of how you're engaging these stories. Did you guys ever experience that in your lives? Did you have something like that kind of tweaked the way you felt about something, and you have hopefully recognized it and maybe started to rectify some of that? Or have you seen it in Friends?
I feel like I've definitely seen it in Friends. I feel like my parents were pretty great growing up. You know, they didn't, you know, there wasn't popcorn theology when my parents were growing up, but they always did a good job of, like, pointing out, like, bad things in movies, you know, like, hey, we don't do that. That's a bad way to go about a relationship. You know, we don't sleep with somebody before we marry them. That's a bad thing too. That's another thing that romantic comedies are always pushing, is like, you got to sleep with them to find out if you like them or not. Which is totally opposite of what you should do. So I feel like I had a pretty good upbringing in the fact that, I knew that, like, most of the things in rom-coms were pretty toxic, and maybe that's why they're not my favorite genre, to be honest, because I just recognize that, and I'm just like, I just don't feel like sifting through it. And again, that's like a choice you can make. It's not saying that you can't watch rom-coms, and obviously I do watch some rom-coms, and even rom-coms that have a toxic message sometimes, because The Wedding Planner is just one I grew up and I just really like Matthew McConaughey. So I'm gonna keep watching it. But it is a terrible message, and again, that's what we're all about, is like you have to be able to sift through that. And sometimes for me, it's, as a genre, I don't want to sift through it that much just because that's my choice. So if that's your choice, that's fine. But just know, like you were saying, Kat, be very mindful when you're watching these types of movies, especially, I feel like.
Well, and they're very targeted. They are very targeted to young women and women in particular. Yeah. And yeah, if you don't have a good foundation, it feels like very treacherous ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was glad that you brought this up, Maddie, because I think with our audience on this podcast, it goes without saying that obviously the physical aspect of the relationship that rom-coms are so insistent on pushing on all of us is part of the toxic messaging. But I do think it's worth addressing that. If we're going to talk about what Hollywood gets wrong when it comes to romantic comedies, there is so much of this idea that the foundation of the relationship is the physical. And again, if that's your starting point, what is your ending point? Because so we don't need to spend a whole lot of time going down that rabbit trail. But I think, it's a distinction that just needs to be made, that the Christian worldview should obviously, that's an area of obvious separation for the Christian from the world. But yeah, I think, I'm so sorry. I just totally lost my train of thought. There was
Derailed. No survivors.
Yeah. I'll hop back in if it comes.
You can come back in. I was thinking too, like we've talked a lot about certain actors, right? And there's this idea that the script, I think it's something the cinema therapy guys have said a couple times, is like the script wants you to believe in it, and you do just because they're pretty.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
They have great chemistry. They're pretty people. They're really good actors, so they actually make it sound plausible.
Yes.
And yet I was reminded of 1 Samuel 16, where it says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart."
Yes.
And I think that's another huge piece of romantic comedies too, right? Oh, he's so pretty, or they're so smooth or cool or whatever. But what is the inward part of their character? And then, like you were saying, Bridget, that idea of if the physicality is your foundation, what happens when that goes away? Either through age or through trauma. If that's your only foundation, then when that goes away, you have no basis for the relationship.
Right. And that's another area where it's so easy for the response to become, you're just not good enough for me anymore, too. If that is the basis for your relationship, you're not going to be the best in that area forever. There's going to be somebody, So, and that actually reminded me of what I wanted to say. So thank you, Kat, for that. It's reminding me of the scripture in Song of Solomon. I think I have it pulled up here. Chapter 8, verse 4, about not awakening love until it so desires, until it's ready. And I think that's part of what Hollywood gets wrong. It awakens love. It calls it love. That's not even love, but it awakens it in situations where it is not meant to be awoken. We stoke the physical fire when we have no right to do so. And I think I am so often reminded, I probably bring this up every single time on an episode, but Kat, you were talking about, like, are there moments of catechism in our own personal lives? And one that sticks out for me, like you, Maddie, I had parents who trained me well when I was young. So that was always part of our movie watching experience. But as an adult, a moment that stood out for me, I will never forget watching the video the first time, where R.C. Sproul is talking to his audience and actually ends up yelling at them.
Oh, what?
How dare you not know who God is and who you are? So this idea of who is God versus who I am as a human being, as his creation, I think can add so much understanding to this whole situation of what is love, what is romance. For the Christian, we must submit to God's will for love and his plan, his design, his definition of love, because he is God. So period. Like there is nothing else. We don't get to define love beyond the bounds that God has given us to define love. And so I think that is such an important element in all of this too. We can't awaken a love before it desires. And how do we know when it's ready? Well, are you walking with God? Are you seeking someone who is also walking with God? Because if you have that proper view of who he is versus who you are, then that will certainly help to align all of your other priorities too.
Yeah.
And that can help temper so much of the fire and the passion that does happen, because I've had those waves of affection. I've had crushes on people. I've had a hard time, getting over a breakup. I've had some very poor relationship choices in my life. That's for a whole nother
we're gonna dish on a new episode.
To some of that from personal experience, like things that I put up with that I shouldn't have put up with, things that that I romanticized away, that I downplayed, sins of my own and sins of my partner that made life very difficult and have caused problems that you couldn't necessarily expect. And I think too, like you're saying, with knowing who God is and who we are, we can also have an understanding of what we expect from that relationship. Because I think too, we often expect the relationship to heal us. If we find the right person, they're going to help fix all of our problems. So even if we are looking in sort of the right direction, we might still be pointing at that person to do all of the work, rather than relying on the Holy Spirit, or doing a lot of the heavy lifting with God, with the Holy Spirit to mend the issues within us, rather than expecting that partner to be the person that makes us feel safe, that makes us feel whole. That's an unrealistic expectation to put on that person, even the best person, right? Even a Wesley from Princess Bride, right? As You Wish. That's an unrealistic expectation to lay on someone like him. Even when you're saying, like, as good as it gets, where he says, you make me want to be a better man. That's a fabulous sentiment. That's a great idea. I want to grow and mature with you. But if I'm expecting you to drag me kicking and screaming toward that maturity alone, then I'm going to burn you out. But at the same time, I think we can fall into that emotional catharsis of a romantic comedy. And I liked, just to quote them again, the Cinema Therapy guys, they mentioned the idea that part of why we like these movies is they offer us a good, clean ending sometimes, right? Like you get this, it ends, we'll joke that it ends before the hard work actually starts, but it gives you this like, and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
You don't get that in life. Right? We don't get that. And part of why we then lambast these movies is because we're like, but that's not life. But there is an element of that sort of cathartic escapism that we desire in a story like this. We want that bow on top. We want to be like, they could just stay right there. It'd be beautiful. It'd be great. I'm just going to imagine them there. Never moving forward. Right.
Everything perfect.
Just as they were.
And so there is a place. I think there is a place for stories like that, right? As long as we understand and appreciate that that's what's happening, right? If you're having a a hard time, and sometimes this movie is a comfort food, as long as you recognize that it's comfort food, it's not always a sin to indulge in that. But if it is the only thing that's catechizing your understanding of what love is, of what a relationship is, of what to expect from a partner that you want to walk through life with, therein is a problem. So like you were saying, Bridget, the knowing who God is, knowing who you are, knowing what your purpose is, to glorify him, to worship him, to obey his commandments, can we find someone who wants to do that with us?
Yeah.
Right. With the appropriate potential for maturity. Again, you don't have to be, that person doesn't have to be perfect when you find them. They're never going to be, right?
Nope.
But do they have the appropriate understanding to partner with you in walking through that? And that type of relationship can be incredibly fulfilling, incredibly rewarding, and safe, and loving, and so an absolute balm and salve to some of the hardships that you will face in this life. So the longing that we have for that is absolutely God-given.
Yeah.
And I remember in Say Anything, which could also go under the like grand romantic gesture that everyone knows about, right? Holding up the song, the beatbox. At one point, she comes back, like her whole world is falling apart, and she comes back to him, and he says, "Are you here because you need someone, or because you need me?" And then he goes, "Forget it, I don't care." But it's a really profound question.
Yeah.
Right? Are you just grasping for someone to fill that hole, to fill that need, to try and fix something in you? Or is there a partner that is compatible with you, that you work well with? Again, conflict resolution, communication skills, shared worldview, shared understanding of what your purpose in this world is to move forward in. So that's what you're catechized in. And that's then what you're evaluating, what you're looking for through. So in light of that, and some of those things that we've talked about, after we've just sort of ripped up a whole bunch of romantic comedies, shown all these ways that they can be very detrimental, very quicksandy sort of things to walk through, what are some good ideas for you guys how do we navigate that repeated messaging? And are there any good rom-coms at all? Aside from Jane Austen, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously. Chef's kiss of the romantic comedies. I mean, I think, again, there's definitely good ones. And, again, I think it is a matter of, like, sifting through, what's good and what's bad. I can't think of, like, a single one that I feel like is, like, really perfectly good. You know what I mean? Like, in a Christian sense. Like, there's no Christian romantic comedies. And also, I have seen a Christian romantic comedy. It was terrible. What was it called? It was the one in Ireland that came out a couple years ago. It was, like, set in Ireland. And, I don't remember the name of it. It was bad, though. Most Christian movies are bad, though. So it's just kind of part of that. But again, like, I was just trying to think, I'm like, is there any movie that I could think of that actually had maybe a Christian couple or a Christian-esque couple who actually kind of had a sense of propriety and had that together? I'm having a real hard time. I'm not. Maybe Return to Me. Did they sleep together?
Nope.
Or did they wait? Okay.
They waited primarily because she was very, very self-conscious of her scar.
Yeah.
But her sister spoke to that as well, where she was like, "Don't shave your legs because shaving your legs might be the only thing that keeps you from."
Yes, I do remember that line. Yes.
In that.
Yes. So like, I
no, they didn't actually, and there were
bit.
actually some.
Yeah.
some really sweet moments in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that one. But yeah, I'm having a hard time thinking of like this is what, like love is, from like a Christian perspective. It's very hard to come up with something, at least in this genre.
Yeah.
Well, I would also say, like, part of why we keep seeing these things cycle through, right? A lot of the different comedies that we've talked about, the same messaging that comes up, is partially because they're constantly being remade. I mean, James and I joke all the time that Hollywood isn't out of ideas. They never had any. They were cribbing from books and plays way back in the beginning. And so you'll see things like Romeo and Juliet. Okay, we're talking Shakespeare, right? Well, that's West Side Stories, basically Romeo and Juliet. They just made it gangs and put some music in it, right? Warm Bodies, which was actually one of 2 Zom rom-coms.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, Shaun of the Dead is another fantastic romantic comedy. And I'd like to point out that he does actually mature and grow by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But that's Romeo and Juliet. It's unabashed in the fact that it's Romeo and Juliet. There's even a balcony scene. Emma, right? We talked about Emma. Well, that Clueless is Emma. She's a busybody. She's trying to put her friends together. They even kept the same character names. Can you guys think of some other ones that are like that? I mean, there's quite a few. There's
I mean, Pride and Prejudice gets remade every couple years, and different cultures and different
have you guys
different
seen
genres.
Bride and Prejudice?
I tried watching it, and I didn't. Maybe I'm just not into Bollywood. I couldn't get into it. So
I loved it so much.
I need to go back and try to finish that one, because I do know a lot of people are like, I love that one so much. So I need to give it a second chance. Maybe I was in a bad mood when I watched it.
It might just not be a great movie.
Yes, but it is Pride and Prejudice.
It is. Yeah, I do think between Shakespeare and Austen, like, those are our love stories. That's what you have to pick from. You're remaking something Shakespeare did or something that Jane Austen did.
Yes. Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
That's pretty much true.
I mean, you see Taming of the Shrew becomes Kiss Me Kate, becomes 10 Things I Hate About You. Much Ado About Nothing. Actually, did you guys see Anyone But You? It was a recent one with Julie.
I didn't see it, but I know about it. Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. Yeah,
Glenn Howell. Yep,
right.
It's Much Ado About Nothing.
Okay.
The Shop Around the Corner, which was an older movie, I think in the 40s, maybe.
Yep. Jimmy Stewart.
It was turned into a musical. She Loves Me, which became You've Got Mail. Pride and Prejudice is Bridget Jones's Diary is playing with some of the Pride and Prejudice themes, Mr. Darcy, that sort of thing. You have Cinderella, becomes Ever After, becomes Made in Manhattan. Cyrano de Bergerac was Roxanne with Steve Martin. So again, you can see like these things get recycled.
Yes.
As well as then just the cultural understanding. And then just a shout out to David, because I know he loves My Fair Lady. Like, that's based on Pygmalion. Yep.
Yep.
Which My Fair Lady becomes sort of Pretty Woman, becomes She's All That.
Yeah, right.
And so you see these things cycling all the time. So in that sense, again, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So we're constantly being bombarded with these ideals, and we're constantly then having to sift and navigate those ideals. And I just think it's really important as we look toward romance and potential partners to remember Galatians 5, talking about the fruits of the Spirit. Because I think, too, just focusing on some of what do you see in this person's character, how they treat other people, how they treat you, how they treat their families, if it's one of those big family movies, right? Yeah. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That feels like a big one with romantic comedies.
Oh yeah. I was just thinking that. I'm like, oh, they never get that one right. No self-control.
Yeah.
So it's intriguing. And then I think too, in a reject, receive, redeem kind of way, are there some that, like, some of your favorites? Are there things that you're like, I really like this movie, but, or is there one where you're like, I hate this movie, but
Yeah, for me, I mean, definitely. I think the romantic comedy genre is part of what makes it so interesting. And it's so funny. Like, here we are, these three women talking about these movies, and we were discussing beforehand how, like, none of us seeks out romantic comedy to watch. We're all like, we hate this genre. But they are so great for analyzing, for all the reasons that both of you have just been saying, because as Christians, we know that any depiction of a romantic relationship is the coming together of two sinners. So what do we do with that? And I think because of that, even from a worldly perspective, there is so much that the world gets completely wrong about love and about its messaging about love. But what they can't get wrong is that it is bringing two sinners together. So there's always inherently going to be something for the Christian to parse through and to try to have discernment about when you watch a movie in this genre. Because I think as Christians, what we sometimes can be guilty of ourselves is idolizing love, making an idol of marriage and relationship, and wanting it in place of a relationship with God. Yeah. So I think we have to guard against that. And it's a genre that demands discernment and spiritual maturity. And so for that, I think it can be a good thing to check them out sometimes and see what's going on. But to your specific question, Kat, I feel like every single romantic comedy that I actually enjoy would have a yeah, but.
Yep.
And everyone, I would be willing to say, like, the messaging is terrible, but I actually really like watching the movie. So, for example, I'll give one example. We've already brought up Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet is not a comedy, but it's a text. I think it illustrates this point really well. I have taught Romeo and Juliet for 6 years to high school freshmen. As a piece of literature, I think it is absolutely stunning and brilliant and beautiful. And like there are lines that I read that Shakespeare wrote in Romeo and Juliet. I'm like, oh my goodness, to have like 1 ounce of that writing talent. Like it's just an absolutely gorgeous piece of literature. And the story is terrible. Like there's just no way around it. It is it's awful. And I love actually talking with my students once they piece together what is going on and where the story is headed. They're like, wait a second, are you telling me that this is how this story ends? And they're incensed by it. And I love that. It is so unhealthy and just absolutely terrible morality, but it's wrapped in this gorgeous prose. So that's, one example where you can't let yourself be wowed by the artistry without going through and sifting for meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. It's hard to, as a Christian, just accept one of these. Again, there's a lot of yeah buts. So instead of talking about one that I like, maybe I'll just talk about one that I absolutely despise. And again, it was one of those ones where I have heard about this movie for years and years. It's like one of the most it's always on the list of like one of the best romantic comedies out there, and it's 4 Weddings and a Funeral. And that is just a terrible, terrible movie with a very toxic relationship in it. Like, I can't even believe I finished the movie. I think I was so flabbergasted that like this is people's favorite rom-com that I was like, I gotta see this to the end. Like, maybe it changes. Maybe, something magical happens. No, it's just they just accept that they're terrible people pretty much. So I will say maybe reject that one. I have a hard time finding anything to redeem in that particular one. Whereas with a lot of the other ones that I like, like with My Big Fat Greek Wedding and all that, it's like I can ignore, a lot of that and just go with it. Crazy Rich Asians, like obviously they're sleeping together before they're married, and it's like I'll just ignore that because I like them. But it's not a good thing. Like, I know that that's not a good thing. I'm not accepting it in the sense that I would actually do that. And I think that's important, is like when you're watching these, is to know that like, yeah, you might be enjoying watching these people do these things, or even some of the crazy situations that they get into, but knowing that you should never do that. Like, you should never lie about something, even if it's a funny situation trying to get out of something, and you should never, do that before you're married, obviously. And just know, like, where you're drawing the lines when you watch this. Again, just be very mindful that you're not starting to accept that behavior by you watching it constantly, but knowing that every time you watch it, you just kind of mentally point, either physically pointing out, because that's the thing, like when we were growing up, if there was something, like if somebody said something that was a lie about religion or something, a lot of times my dad would be like, out loud, like, that was wrong, and here I'm gonna tell you why, or even bad behavior, like, oh, like, we know we would never do that, right? So even if you're just mentally doing that, like, oh, they did it bad, just keep that, I think that's a good way of watching movies in general, just, to keep that in the back of your mind, to remind yourself of, nope, don't do that.
Well, and I think too, it can be that idea of God's grace to us is so magnificent and generous in how he has rescued us from our sin and brought us into his family. But I think sometimes we can prevail upon that grace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with these types of movies in romance, we can sort of excuse things by saying, oh, like, it all worked out in the end.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of movies seem to fall very much into that trope. Like, okay, they lied, they whatever, but they stopped doing it here and everything worked out in the end. And so therefore it's all okay. And it's kind of that wish for your kids where you're kind of like, learn from my mistakes, right? Don't go through this pain that I've gone through. Learn vicariously through my mistakes. So in that sense too, like watching these movies, learn vicariously, right? Watch the drama and the chaos that shows up because of these behavioral patterns. Yes, God can wring gold and beauty out of tragic, horrible situations, but wouldn't it be nicer if you didn't have to go through the tragic, horrible situation to get there, right? And that's kind of what I feel like I'm advocating for when I'm saying be wary of the romantic comedy. And I think a good indication of, or a good example of that might be a movie called The Notebook.
Oh yeah.
Right, which everyone talks about. I know it was a huge, it kind of became a huge hit. Again, very pretty people making some very reprehensible behavior look amazing. But I will say, like, it starts badly. There's a lot of coercion and manipulation. He practically threatens suicide. That is not a romantic gesture, to try and get someone to go out with you. That is not a healthy foundation for a relationship, just so we're clear. There's even that idea of like, just tell me what you want me to be and I will change everything about myself to be that so that I can have you.
Yes.
And that also is not a healthy place for a relationship to start. Rather than finding someone who's compatible with where you are now and who is willing to grow and mature with, as we've said before. Yet, at the end of that movie, there is the sweetest picture of long-suffering married life that I think is quite stunning. And I think maybe that's part of why I think it is one of those things where people are like, the ending is so beautiful that we are willing to forgive all
justifies the bad behavior.
So I don't want to say that it justifies the bad behavior, but in that sort of reject redeem, here's a movie where we can absolutely reject the way the relationship started and how they went about things. But he has a quote where he says, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be really hard. And we're going to have to work at this every day. But I want to do that because I want you. I want all of you forever, you and me, every day. And then what the movie shows us is that they had a married life together. They married, they had kids, and she has now developed dementia and she's forgetting that life that they had together. And what he does is he comes to her every day in the state that she's in, and he reads her their story. And as she wrote it down, she wrote it in the notebook. So it was what she had written about their life, and he came to her every day and read her that story. And there's this, I'm going to cry. There's this super poignant moment at the end when she becomes lucid for a moment, and she's like, like, I know who you are. And she asks him, how much time do we have? And he's like, not much, like maybe 5 minutes before she forgets him again. But that endurance of his love at that point is something that can be absolutely lauded. And I think that's the feeling people are chasing with these romance movies. That's what we've been talking about. That's that catharsis that it provides. It's that, I want to be loved like that. Right. And that's what we would advocate for. That's what we believe. That's the kind of love God has for us. And that's the kind of love that can be cultivated in those romantic relationships, as long as you are cautious, careful, dedicated to command yourself, to control your love, to show those fruits of the Spirit as the Holy Spirit helps and guides you. Some of these things are absolutely possible in that. So I don't want to end the romantic comedy Valentine's Day episode on a huge downer. I want to say that those things are possible in a mature Christian relationship with someone else who wants to be conformed to the Holy Spirit and will walk and mature with you through life. So, please continue to watch movies, engage movies, but with a mindful understanding. As we always say at Popcorn Theology, you are not a mindless consumer. Happy Valentine's Day.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.